Hey, this is Jamey from Stonemaier Games, and today I'm going to talk about games based on intellectual property, IP. I'll use the term IP for the rest of this video, but that means intellectual property. So it's usually these are licensed games. I'll use an example off the bat. A game, there's the Marvel property. If someone licenses Marvel to use for their game, their tabletop game, then that is an IP game based on the Marvel IP. I'm going to break this video down into a couple different segments. You can see it on the bar at the bottom of the video if you want to skip around to the top 10, because it'll take me a few minutes before I actually get to the top 10 on this video, but you can jump right to that part if that's all you want to hear. First, in the video, I want to mention two Stonemaier games that are based on intellectual properties. The first is Scythe. I don't have my copy of Scythe here on my desk, but Scythe is based on the 1920-plus alternate universe created by Jakub Rosalski. Jakub had started to create this world through his art. I think in his head he had a lot of ideas about the world, and then he made maybe 10 illustrations about it. And I saw those illustrations on a website called Kotaku, and was just enamored by them. And so I contacted Jakub. This was back in 2014. I contacted him and said, you know, I love this world that you're building. I would love to be a part of it, and I'd love to design and publish a tabletop game in that world. And that was how Scythe began. So all the rest of the artwork from Scythe came from that collaboration between Jakub and I, and led to Scythe the game and all the different expansions and accessories for it. So that was Scythe. The other one, which you may not think of off the bat, is Between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig. This is a game that, it's an original game, but some of the mechanisms have roots in one of our games, Between Two Cities, and another game from another company that I love, a game called Castles of Mad King Ludwig from Bezier Games. And so when Ben and Matthew were working on this game, and they came to me and they said, you know, Jamey, we were inspired constantly as we were designing this from from Castles of Mad King Ludwig. What do you think about getting that license to use so that we can have this crazy long name, Between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig? And so we did. I reached out to Ted at Bezier. We had a nice meeting at Gen Con a few years ago, and we ended up getting that license. It was a very, I'll name some other examples here, but as it goes, this is a weird license to get. A publisher, game publisher, licensing essentially a kind of a name, kind of a world from another game publisher and put it into their game. But it's kind of a kooky, fun game, and so we did it. We just went with it, and so we saw how it worked out. So those are our two games that are based on intellectual properties at Stonemaier Games. Okay, next up, let's go to the fan picks. I want to mention this here because I asked the Stonemaier ambassadors what their favorite IP games were, and they mentioned a few games here. You might see some of these show up later, you might not. They mentioned Marvel Champions, that was mentioned a lot. The Lord of the Rings LCG. I'm not going to list all their picks, but these are the ones that were repeated multiple times when I surveyed Stonemaier ambassadors. So Marvel Champions, Lord of the Rings LCG, Battlestar Galactica, which came very close to actually making my list. Didn't quite make it, but I do think the skill test mechanism in Battlestar Galactica is really, really cool. Firefly. A lot of people mentioned the Firefly game actually on this list, so I still need to try that. Game of Thrones, the epic long Game of Thrones game, which I have played. I enjoyed it, but it is way longer than the typical game that I play. Jaws, which I have not played, and Dune, which I haven't played, although I have played Rex, which is loosely based on the original Dune. Perhaps not even loosely based, but very directly based on the original Dune. But I haven't played the new version of the Dune game either. Those were the fan picks. Now I'll get to some of the kind of just some honorable mentions and some weird picks that I wanted to highlight a little bit before I get to my top 10. At the top of this list is Nemesis and Dinosaur Island. I wanted to mention them in a category together because they are games that are not actually officially intellectual property games, but Nemesis is definitely based on the Aliens franchise, and Dinosaur Island is definitely based on Jurassic Park. And so this is a kind of a clever thing that you can do for IP games if you love it, if you love a certain IP, but you kind of want to have the flexibility to build your own world and tie into that the nostalgia and the connection that people have to that IP, but within your own space, within your own creative space. This is a way to do it. You can just design a game and have plenty of winks and nods to the original property without infringing on that, without making people confuse that intellectual property with your game or vice versa. And that's what Nemesis and Dinosaur Island did very, very well. Both are highly acclaimed games. Another pair of games that I wanted to mention together are Funkoverse and Unmatched. These are games that kind of they're well, Unmatched is a dueling game that I have played. I haven't played the Funkoverse game, but I think they're both kind of tactical dueling games, and both of them bring in a bunch of different IPs that you can use that as you play. So you can match together. Like in Unmatched, you can. I mentioned Jurassic Park. I think you can play like the Raptors from Jurassic Park against Sherlock Holmes, or I think there's a not Jet Li, but someone who's famous in that area. You can match up all these different people, characters, IPs as they match up against each other. So that's Funkoverse and Unmatched. Recently from Kickstarter, I got, somewhat embarrassingly, but I like Anchorman. I got the Anchorman game. I haven't actually opened it yet to see. Actually, no, I did open it. It's kind of a party game, but it looked kind of fun. So I thought it was kind of random that they based a game off of Anchorman, a movie that is at least 10 years old at this point. But kind of fun. They did that. So that's an IP game that I haven't played yet. There is, actually, no, not this one yet. There is Small World of Warcraft, which is also a fun twist. I like that they took the existing World of Warcraft and did more than just kind of slapping on. No, I'm sorry. They took Small World, and instead of just slapping on the World of Warcraft theme, they went fairly deep into it in terms of the designs of the different factions, the artifacts they included in the game, and they made tweaks to the original Small World game as well, especially with the map system. You can check out my video about that if you'd like. But I thought that was clever that they took this giant MMO and turned it into and brought that IP into the Small World universe. That's Small World of Warcraft. Pillars of the Earth. I thought this was a really creative one. I didn't think of this. Someone mentioned this on my Facebook Live video last week. Pillars of the Earth is a kind of an acclaimed Euro game, an older game that's based off of a giant novel called Pillars of the Earth. So I thought that was clever. I'm going to mention a few other examples of games based on novels here. There's also Civilization. Civilization, the game, was based on the video game. And there are kind of an increasing number of games that are based on video games, tabletop games based on video games. But this is one of the earliest ones, I think, tabletop game, fairly acclaimed tabletop game that was based on a video game. Another one of those, taking it to the extreme, is Jetpack Joyride, which is a tabletop game based on the mobile game. So a game that you would typically play on your phone. I played this at Geekway 2 years ago and had a lot of fun with it. It's a polyomino Tetris game in real time, and the clever thing about it that I really like is that players determine how much real time is being used. There's no actual timer, it's just the first player to finish the race every round triggers the end of the round for all players. So that's Jetpack Joyride. Another game based on a video game is This War of Mine, which is kind of a dark game. I think there's a game called Frostpunk on Kickstarter right now that is done by the same people as This War of Mine. A lot of great storytelling, dark but great storytelling in both of those games as far as I know. And Frostpunk is actually another example of a tabletop game based on a video game. There's Call to Adventure, which maybe I should have included in the Funkoverse and Unmatched category, because in Call to Adventure, they have built a great template for games to bring in epic fantasy IPs to apply to the Call to Adventure series. So far, they've used the Stormlight Archive from Brandon Sanderson and The Name of the Wind from Patrick Rothfuss, as well as the core game of Call to Adventure. One that I almost held up earlier was Zorro the Dice Game. So I thought this was interesting, tying back to a much older IP. I'm not even sure that Zorro is like an official IP at this point that you need to license, or if they just love the Zorro theme and applied it to it. Because there are some themes like Alice in Wonderland, Sherlock Holmes. They are intellectual properties, but you no longer need to get the rights to them. They're open source, I guess. There's another term for it that I'm blanking on. But they're open for anyone to use at this point because they've been around for so long. But I'm still counting them in the intellectual property category. Same with Lovecraft and Cthulhu, that theme. I'm going to count that in intellectual properties. So Zorro, I have a video about this one. This is a fun, light, kind of push-your-luck dice rolling game. A couple more honorable mentions, and then I'll get to the top 10. There's also the Bob Ross game, which I thought was just kind of silly fun to have a Bob Ross game, but it's actually a really well-designed set collection. I don't want to say order completion game, but you're painting. It's just a really, really clever game. And I love that they based a game off of Bob Ross. There's also Expanse, the Expanse tabletop game, based on the novel series and the TV series, The Expanse, one of my favorite novel series. And the tabletop game is a little bit like, maybe a little bit like Twilight Struggle, but a lot more streamlined in terms of the decisions that you have to make in the game. But really, really clever game. That's one that I would definitely play again, but I've only played once. And last, we have Trogdor, which came very, very close to making my top 10. But the Trogdor, this is another very weird one. I think it's based off of a single YouTube video. But it's actually a really cleverly designed cooperative game where all players are controlling one character, Trogdor himself, as they try to win this cooperative game. That's another one that I would definitely play again because it's silly fun, it's very easy to learn and play, and it's really cool that all players are using the same token to manipulate on the board. All right, how far are we in? We're 10 minutes in already, and I haven't even got to the top 10, but that's what these tags are at the bottom of the video. So let's jump right into the top 10, my top 10. And this will also be a weird top 10 because whenever I mention a major IP in this top 10, I'll list the other games in this IP that I didn't choose for it. When will I start with that? Well, I won't start right away, but number 10 is The Reckoners. I mentioned Brandon Sanderson earlier. Brandon Sanderson is great at building magic systems and worlds, and The Reckoners is a novel trilogy, I believe. Maybe $4, but I think it's 3 books that I really enjoyed. It is also a fantastic cooperative game with a lot of simultaneous play and dice rolling. And yeah, number 10, Reckoners, great game. And actually, as I go through this list, I might mention a few little things here. So I'll mention one of these things here. One consideration, I think, if you're working with an IP for a game, is that you have to, you're not just creating something for your fans and for yourself, but you're essentially creating something for the person or company that owns the IP. And so you have to work with this outside entity, oftentimes to get permissions about things, permission for the art. Sometimes they want to have permissions for the mechanisms themselves and the gameplay and how heavy it is, how expensive it is. You have to refer to this other entity constantly throughout the process. I did that with Scythe, and it ended up being a very fruitful collaboration with Scythe, but I can see sometimes it not being that fruitful. It might be very difficult to work with someone else who feels so passionately about their IP because they created this world, and you kind of have to work around that as you go. So that's something to think about. I don't know if that happened with the Reckoners, but I'll just mention that along with the Reckoners at number 10. Number 9 is my favorite Lord of the Rings game. I might get a little flack for this because it is definitely like the lightest and maybe an example that I'll use of games with a theme applied to an existing game where not a lot was done to change the game for this theme, and that is The Hobbit Love Letter. I love this theme. I love Lord of the Rings. I like The Hobbit. I like the book The Hobbit more than the movies, but I love The Hobbit book. And it elevates Love Letter almost, for me, well above the original Love Letter. And it does change a few little mechanisms in it. There's the Arkham Stone in it. I think there's the One Ring in it. There are just a few cards that are a little bit different in this version of The Hobbit Love Letter. And I really enjoy this game. This is my preferred Love Letter for sure. There are some other Love Letters. Love Letter is one of these series where they've applied a lot of different IPs to it. But I really love this one. Some other Lord of the Rings games that I considered for the list, but did not choose for it, are Lord of the Rings LCG, which I haven't played. Oh, no, I have played that on the digital version, but not the tabletop version. War of the Ring, which I haven't played. Battle of the Five Armies, I haven't played. Hunt for the Ring, I haven't played. And Journeys in Middle-earth, which I have played. And as great of a game as that is, I think I'd rather play Hobbit Love Letter. So I picked this at number 9 for my favorite IP games. At number 8, we're getting to the Star Wars category here. Star Wars Rebellion is my number 8 favorite IP game, and my choice here for the list for the amazing Star Wars IP. One of my favorite IPs and one of the biggest IPs in the world. I love Rebellion. It's a game that I don't get to the table very often. I no longer have my copy, but every play I had of it was just epic and memorable. It is like truly this epic experience to play Star Wars Rebellion. I chose it over some other good games, though. I chose it over the Star Wars LCG and Destiny. The LCG is one that I played I played the CCG back in the day. I haven't played the LCG or Destiny. I have played Imperial Assault, and I think it's a great game. Didn't quite choose it for this one. I played X-Wing, didn't choose that either. I haven't played Outer Rim or Epic Duels, but I have played Unmatched, which is kind of the modern version of Epic Duels. And Outer Rim, I've heard, is a great kind of a pick up and deliver game that really elevates the pick up and deliver mechanism, but I haven't played that either yet. So Star Wars Rebellion is my Star Wars pick, and it is my number 8 pick. At number 7, I mentioned Sherlock Holmes earlier. Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. I'm including this on the IP list, even though anyone can make a game in the Sherlock Holmes world without doing many of the things that you need to do to get an IP now, because it is an open intellectual property for anyone to use at this point. And Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, it's been a while since I played it, but I love the game. The idea behind this game is that you are solving a mystery in a pretty open-ended way. It's fully cooperative, and it's a storybook game where you're jumping from location to location to read different storybook entries, but it is completely open. The game doesn't tell you, like, you have to go read this entry now. Rather, the game says it has different locations marked, and when you get to a location, you read the passage, and you learn what you can from it, and then you decide, looking at the newspaper that you have for that episode, for the map that you have, and the information you have so far, you decide where to go next. So you're literally investigating this mystery with your friends, or even solo, and trying to figure it out. There's no time limit. Although there might be a time mechanism in the game, but when I played it, we've kind of ignored that and just said we're just going to play this game as long as we want until we feel like we have solved the mystery. I've had just a great experience with it, and that is Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective at number 7. My number 6 favorite game, this is one that I do have, favorite IP game, is Marvel Villainous. And I've kind of included Disney Villainous in this as well. I'm honestly not sure. If I had the choice between the two, it would kind of depend on the circumstances, because I love the way the Fate deck works in Marvel Villainous, but I love that Disney Villainous goes up to 6 players. So this is a very, very asymmetric game that is very also cleverly designed. I love how you have these mats in Marvel Villainous that show you your actions, and when you choose one of these, there's 4 different sections, kind of like in Scythe, where you, on your turn, you choose one of these sections, and you activate all the different benefits on it, all the different actions on it. But these different sections can be changed over the course of the game. There is actually a sense of progression by the cards that you can apply to it. Both cards that maybe another player applies to your mat and decreases your abilities, but also cards that you can apply to your mat to enhance your different actions. Just the extreme asymmetry in this game, the different goals that you're accomplishing, is amazing to have in such a streamlined format. It's very easy to learn how to play this game, but the asymmetry is really, really strong in it. And so Marvel Villainous, Disney Villainous, they are my number, what did I say, 6 here. They're my number 6 favorite intellectual property game. At number 5 is the Lovecraft Cthulhu game on the list, and that is Mansions of Madness. This is the 2nd edition of Mansions of Madness. I have really enjoyed all of my plays of this. Again, it's been a little while since I played it, but all the different episodes are distinctly different. It is kind of a dungeon crawl game where you are not just fighting monsters. You are gathering clues. You're talking to people. You are deducting things. You're solving puzzles along the way. I love that there are puzzles in this. And I think my favorite one, there was one where the different rooms would kind of just leave for a while. So you'd have a room on the table, and then suddenly it would disappear for a while, or it would change to a different room. It really made you feel like you were in this haunted, mysterious mansion. But I love that every scenario is different in Mansions of Madness. And I've had fun every time I played it, except maybe one time that there was one scenario that was very combat oriented. I don't love dungeon crawl games with a ton of combat, but every other episode of Mansions of Madness I've really, really enjoyed. So it is my number 5 pick. Other Lovecraft games that I did not mention were, and I meant to, I'll have to go back to Marvel in a second, but other Lovecraft games that I didn't mention were the Arkham Horror LCG, which I have played, but definitely not my favorite. Eldritch Horror, Arkham Horror, A Study in Emerald, AuZtralia, which has a great, has the time track mechanism. I love time tracks. Cthulhu Death May Die. A bunch of people mentioned this actually on the ambassador list, but I haven't played that one yet. Mansions of Madness, which was my pick. Pandemic Reign of Cthulhu, which is one of my favorite versions of Pandemic. I really like the Reign of Cthulhu version of Pandemic. Mythos Tales, which is very similar to Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, but in kind of the Lovecraft theme, the Lovecraft universe. Cthulhu Wars, and Mountains of Madness. All those are a lot of fun. I really do. I enjoyed a couple plays of Cthulhu Wars, and Mountains of Madness is a party game that is actually a surprisingly amount of fun for a party game, which is a category that I usually don't gravitate towards, where you have cards that make you feel a little crazy while you play. They do make you do things like you can never say a certain word, or whenever someone says a certain word, you have to do something a little silly, as you are also doing these actual game mechanism type things to win the game. So yeah, my pick out of those was Mansions of Madness. And I need to go back for a second and talk about the other Marvel games that I didn't pick, which were Marvel Champions, Marvel Legendary, Marvel United, Villainous, which is the one I picked, Dice Masters, Marvel Dice Masters, and Thanos Rising. I haven't played many of those, but I played Villainous, which was my pick, Marvel Legendary, and Marvel Champions. My number 4 favorite IP game is my Harry Potter pick, which is Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle. I've actually played this game more than just the standard campaign. I started out playing just episode 7, I think, because I heard that was like the one to go to, the really hard one. So I figured, okay, I don't have time for a campaign game right now. I'll just jump in and play episode 7. And we had a lot of fun with it. I think we lost every time, but we had a lot of fun trying to win episode 7. This is a deck building game in the Harry Potter universe. And then I was like, I had so much fun. Let's just play the campaign. And so we got the campaign version, or the full version, and we played through the campaign. And it does start off pretty easy, but that's okay. I'm okay with quick. It's a very quick deck building game early on in the campaign, and then you add more and more stuff to it. I love that sense of progression throughout the campaign. I love how simple the mechanisms are. And the difficulty hit like a really nice sweet spot, because it is very hard in certain episodes, but that makes it feel really good when you are able to actually win. So that's a Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle. The weird thing about Harry Potter, I considered this on the big IP list, along with Marvel, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and Lovecraft. But really, there were only 2 games that I had even heard of in this world that I have heard people talking about. And that's Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle and Death Eaters Rising, which is kind of the Harry Potter version of Thanos Rising. I think there is like a miniatures game, but I haven't heard much about it at all. And when I searched on Board Game Geek, there are a bunch of other Harry Potter games that came up, but I've never heard of any of them. And I haven't really heard anyone in the hobby community talking about them. So maybe I'm missing one here, but if I'm missing like a major Harry Potter game, feel free to mention it in the comments. But I was just surprised that there weren't more really highly acclaimed games in that category. That was number 4, so that brings me to number 3, which is Mechs versus Minions. My copy is being lent to a friend right now. I am keeping it mostly just because the components are so beautiful. I have played through the campaign, and I don't know if I would play it again, but I loved playing through the campaign of Mechs versus Minions. It is a cooperative programming game, which is a mechanism that I usually don't gravitate towards, but in a cooperative realm, I think programming is a lot of fun because it gives you full agency over the decisions you're making. Under a time constraint, I think you have 3 minutes. There's this big timer. You have around 3 minutes to program your different mechs as they move across this board, a bunch of different boards, as they try to complete these scenarios, different scenarios. And the programming ends up just being zany when you actually activate things, because you put all this thought in the programming and then you activate and just see what happens. And that is, it's a really, really cool, fun, a little zany, a little silly cooperative game with a great tutorial. I highly recommend checking out the tutorial for Mechs vs. Minions. And I haven't mentioned this, but this is based on the League of Legends IP. So it is a game based in a world created by the same company. So the tabletop game is published by the same company that publishes League of Legends. So that's number 3, Mechs vs. Minions. Number 2 is a weird game on this list. You'll see why in a second, but it is Legendary Encounters Alien, or Aliens. I always forget if it's plural or not. This is an awesome thematic deck building game. One of my favorite deck building games. And I highly recommend you play it if you have someone else who can set it up for you and teach you how to play it. Teaching it is actually very easy, but the setup for it is made way more difficult than it needs to be because of the several different scenarios that they put into the game. The core of the game itself, though, is really, really awesome because you have these cards that are creeping towards you face down, and you don't know what they are because they're in the dark. They're in the spaceship, somewhere in the spaceship, or the air, wherever you are, and you can't see them yet, and they're creeping toward you. They're most likely aliens. And then they get to you and they attack. And so you can choose to venture out into the darkness and discover these creatures and attack them, or you can wait till they get to you. And this is a great cooperative decision to make. Who and when and are you doing it together? Are you going out into the darkness to fight these creatures, or are you going to stay here and let the creatures come to you and then fight them? I love that decision in the game. It's such a great thematic decision. But the setup of this game is way harder than it needs to be, and that's why I had a copy, but I never actually got it at the table because I couldn't get past the setup. But it is a fantastic game. It should have been on my recent list of games that are laborious to set up, but are totally worth the effort. That's my number 2, Legendary Encounters Alien. My number 1 game on this list is one that I own digitally, but not in tabletop format, and that is Lords of Waterdeep. This is a now classic worker placement game, and it is based on the Dungeons and Dragons IP. I love Lords of Waterdeep. I always have fun when I play it. Even if I'm teaching someone the base version, I love the progression in the base version. When you start out with these core actions that are very easy to explain, and the game expands as you build more action spaces throughout the game that anyone can use. Anyone can build something, and all players can use that. It's something that definitely inspired my design of Charterstone. But I love the simplicity of the worker placement and those decisions with the buildings, the progression with the buildings. I love the secret that you have the secret lord that gives you, that is you and gives you extra points at the end of the game. I love the way the missions work in this game. That I mentioned this on my video about missions, that when you fulfill a mission, complete a mission, you get some points usually, but you also usually get something else that leads you into the next mission. Sometimes it's an engine building thing that helps you for the rest of the game. Sometimes it's just more resources that you can push into the next mission, so you can kind of chain together these missions as you play. Great mission system. And the expansions are wonderful too. The Scoundrels of Skullport has a great corruption mechanism that I really, really love. Love everything about this game. Lords of Waterdeep, my number 1 IP game. Thanks for staying with me for this longer video about intellectual property games. Let's see if I missed any topics that I need to... Oh yeah, I do have a few topics here that I forgot to mention. One is also, if you're considering an IP, there's the royalty cost. So you have to pay a royalty to the company or entity that holds the IP. And so that increases the cost of the game and likely increases the cost of the price of the game too, to consumers. So you have to kind of consider, do I want to make a game about dragons in my own dragon world, or do I want to license Dungeons and Dragons? Is that going to bring in that much bigger of an audience to boost the game, or is it worth building my own world? And that's the other part of it. And with an IP game, you're trying to appeal both to gamers, people who are actually going to play the game, and to maybe non-gamers who love the IP, and it's an invitation for them to join the hobby community, which I think is wonderful. That's a wonderful thing about hobby games. But it's also something really to to keep in mind as you are going through that design process. If I am building a game in this IP, am I being welcoming to those who are not used to tabletop games, but will want to play a game in this IP? That's something that you really have to keep in mind, and I think is a challenge for many of these IP games, just to keep that non-gamer audience in mind. And there's also the fun, if you have an IP that you are super passionate about, the idea that you might potentially be attracting new fans into that IP. So if you make a great game, you might find people who don't know that IP, but discover it through the game and then want to learn more about the IP. I wonder if that happened with like The Expanse or Trogdor. Have people discovered Trogdor through the Trogdor game? I'm sure there are Call to Adventure. There are a number of games on this list that I wonder if people have discovered the original IP through the game itself. So that can be a lot of fun to do. And last is the question, I think people have asked me this before, like if you want to make a game, an IP game, where do you even start? Like, who do you contact about getting the intellectual property? And part of the decision here is, are you going to self-publish or not? If you're going to self-publish, then yeah, you're going to have to go out and find usually an agent or a lawyer representing the entity that holds the IP and express your interest in the IP. Or you can just be a designer and you can design a game and submit it to a publisher for the IP. This is a little bit more challenging though, because if you design a game that is deeply ingrained into the theme of the IP, that can be great if the publisher can actually get the IP, but if the publisher feels like they can't get the IP or they don't want the IP, then you've kind of just designed yourself out of getting a publisher. So you might want to have a backup plan if you do that. You could design around an IP and say, okay, present it to a publisher and say this game would be great in the Lord of the Rings IP. But if that is not available, you can show them, I can tweak these things so that it's a nod to that world and that IP, but isn't actually set in that world. So keep that in mind if you were designing a game to submit to a publisher in a certain IP world. This is a lot to digest. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments about any of these topics, your favorite IP games, if there are certain IP games that you are looking forward to trying, or any challenges that you've heard of publishers or designers who have designed IP games. Thanks for bearing with me. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks.